Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Conchado Peterson. I work as communications manager for the Alumni Association, and we're here together, gathered to have a presentation by Stephen Half, author, and Diana Conchado, translator of Kid Quixotes. I will let Judith Daniel do the formal introduction in a second, but I just wanted to ask for all guests that you put your microphones on mute and remain muted for the duration of the discussion. And then also, if case needed, we have closed captioning enabled, and that should show up as an icon on your toolbar, which says live transcript CC. So Judith, I'll take it away, please.
Thank you, Kinshasa. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event sponsored by the Hunter College High School Alumni Association Diversity Committee. I'm Judith Daniel, class of 1979, and I am the chair of the Diversity Committee as well as one of the board of directors of the Alumni Association. The Diversity Committee, as you're aware, is one of the committees of the Corporation of the Alumni Association, and we are here to work on issues regarding the high school, with the high school regarding diversity, but we're also here to reach out to alums and to, we welcome alums to participate on the Diversity Committee as we work with students on various issues with the high school and the Alumni Association. Tonight, I am so happy to present to you our Hispanic Heritage Month event. This is the first time that we are celebrating this event, the Hispanic Heritage. In the past, we've had Black History Month and celebrated Women in History Month, and we look forward to being increasing and being inclusive of everybody's background, ethnicity, just heritage and affinities. So I'm going to start. So we're going to start with a presentation by Diana, a small one, and then by Stephen Hoff. They will talk more about what they're here tonight to talk about. But what I would like to tell you before I introduce Diana, that, after the two of them present, there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers. We're going to have an intimate, group tonight, so probably we'll have some discussion. But if you have a question that comes up as the two are speaking, if you could just put it in the chat, please, and then I can read it after the presentations are done. So I would like to present to you my very good friend, Diana Conchado from Hunter. As you can see, we're both class of 1979, and I think Diana was like my first friend. We were at homeroom together in 7th grade, and we've been great friends since then. Diana Conchado graduated, as I said, from Hunter in 1979, and then she graduated from Hunter College before going on to Brown University. At Brown, she earned her master's and PhD in Hispanic Studies. Her fields of specialization include Golden Age literature, Galician literature, and which is true to her heart, I know that, and literary translation. She is an associate professor of Spanish in the Department of Romance Languages and a member of the Council on Honors at Hunter College. And without further ado, I would like to present to you Diana Conchado.
Thank you, Judy. I'm delighted to be with all of you here tonight, celebrating my Hispanic heritage among alums of our beloved alma mater. That was so important to me and is still so important to me, with two of my very favorite people, my dear friend Judy Daniel and my dear newer friend Stephen Half. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about how I got involved with Still Waters, and it's a lovely story, really. Late in 2016, I got a message from our departmental secretary at Hunter saying that someone had called the department asking for the name of the person that taught the courses on Cervantes's novel Don Quixote. And that's me. So she asked me, she says, I have this information. They want someone to come and speak to some students. So I said, sure, I'll get in touch with them. I was intrigued. So I got in touch with the person, I took the information, and I ended up having a very brief conversation with Stephen Haff, who is here with us tonight. And he asked me if I could go and speak to these children who were reading the Quixote and give them perhaps some historical context for the novel. The Inquisition, what was going on, that kind of thing, social and historical context. I was very intrigued. And after I hung up with Stephen, I immediately went to the website to see, I wonder what this is all about. And after I saw what was on the website, then I was really, really intrigued. And there was no way I was not going to go to see these children, to meet these children. So I still remember it was December, it was the end of the semester. I went to Bushwick on the subway, and I remember getting out of the subway and walking down Stanhope Street and being met with these beautiful, colorful signs on the sidewalk that the children had made for me, welcoming me. It was love at first sight, and I've never looked back. Nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that afternoon in Bushwick. A group of children, ages ranging from 4 to maybe 15, sitting around a table, discussing Don Quixote, a novel written in 1605 in Spain about an aged man who has some mental issues, discussing Don Quixote with their teacher and me, as if that were the most important and at once natural thing to be doing at that very minute. And it was. And their teacher, Stephen Haff, guiding them with kindness, with firmness, with absolute and utter respect. Everyone listens to everyone is the Still Waters motto. What I experienced was a room full of passion for learning, mutual respect, and love, because that's what it is, it's love. Within those seemingly magical walls, things were happening that I could never have imagined. But Stephen Haff had envisioned this different type of learning environment, and Still Waters is the result of that vision. That first visit of mine was followed by many others, and I am so proud to say that I became sort of a member of the Still Waters family. Mm-hmm. Filled with enthusiasm, I took my own students to Still Waters, both my undergraduate students and my graduate students, because I wanted them to experience the wonder of what went on in that one-room schoolhouse. And, many of my students go on to be teachers, so I thought it was especially important for me to see this, to experience this. A few of them became interns and volunteers at Still Waters, and they were enriched and enlightened by the experience. And the Still Waters children came to Hunter 3 times from 2018, 2019, and 2020 to perform their ever-expanding Kid Quixote show, much to the delight of audiences that included colleagues, students, staff, and also visitors from outside the college. And they still talk about the children's shows today. When Stephen launched his book, Kid Quixotes, which is about Still Waters, but is about much, much more, I was fortunate to be given the contract to translate it into Spanish. It was a daunting task on several fronts. First of all, translating a book about the process of translating is tricky in itself. But also, the book is richly polyphonic. Stephen's voice guides the narrative. But that text is populated by a vast array of characters of all different ages and backgrounds. So capturing in Spanish Stephen's nuanced use of register in the depictions of his subject was important to me and also challenging. In addition, I was translating not only Stephen and the children's voices, but also the words of Milton, Shakespeare, Whitman, Keats, Stevenson, and Frost. Just some of the authors Stephen has read and discussed with the children, because although they might have been working on their Quixote project, Still Waters is all about exploration, curiosity, intellectual adventure of all kinds. And as if this weren't enough, this very complicated intertext also included forays into mathematics, music, and philosophy. Because again, that's what happens at Still Waters. The world is explored, discussed, and pondered around that table in that one room schoolhouse. This translation, begun just before the start of the pandemic, was difficult. No doubt about it. It really consumed me, heart and soul. It took up all my time and all my headspace. But it was also very healing because the book is healing. I would work late into the night and I would be hearing the eerie sirens, fill the still air as I was working. But I got such comfort in knowing that the parents of the Still Waters children, who absolutely adore Stephen, understandably, but who were disappointed that they couldn't read the book in English, would be able to read it now and learn more about the man they so admire and learn also about their own children. And it was my motivating force throughout the entire project, which at times it was tough. It was tough going. And I will always consider having played a part in getting Quixotes to those parents and to a Spanish-speaking readership as one of my proudest professional achievements, undoubtedly. The book is an inspiration to us all. I highly recommend you take a look. Stephen Half, the founder and director of Still Waters, was born and raised in Canada and earned his Master of Fine Arts from the Yale School of Drama. His passion for theater brought him to New York City, and the rest of this fascinating and exceptional story I will leave to Stephen so that he can tell it to you himself. I introduce you to Stephen Half, a true hero, a true Don Quixote for our time.
Gracias, Diana. I'm thankful to you, Diana, for all the teaching, all the support, the welcoming of the students to Hunter College, your skill as a translator, your extensive knowledge of the history and literary context for the book, and most of all, your friendship. So thank you very much. And I consider your Spanish translation to be the greatest honor that I've been given. It means so much to me that that story can be told to people who I care about and people who need to hear it in their language. So thank you. I'll I'll set the scene for everyone, and I'm going to read a passage from the book. And then if there are pieces of context that are missing, just type them into chat, please. Like if I have skipped over some part of the story that you're curious about, go right ahead and put that in the chat window, and I'll respond to it after the reading. So I'm going to read a passage from my book, Kid Quixotes, which has been it's now out in paperback, but under a different title. It's called Still Waters in a Storm, which is the name of my little school in Bushwick. And that's a name that a student, years ago, one of my high school students gave it the group that name, because he said that the place where we met and listened to each other was a place of peace in the middle of a storm, and the storm being his life. And everybody, I think, needs a place where they can go when their life gets stormy. So the basic ritual that we practice at Still Waters is we all write something and then read our writing out loud while the group listens. And then we have a conversation about what we heard. And it's never a critique. It's we talk about associations that we have with what was read, feelings that it stirred up, questions that we have, nothing ever in the way of correcting or or telling someone what they should have done instead of what they did do. So that's the basic practice, is just writing and then listening and having a conversation. And the one motto, as Deanna said, the one rule is everyone listens to everyone. It doesn't matter how old the kids are. And in the scene I'm going to read to you, there are kids as young as 6 and as old as 17, plus college students and adult professionals. So it doesn't matter what the age is or the background or the varying abilities to speak English or Spanish. All that matters is that we listen to each other. Whoever is addressing the group, we listen to them. Sometimes it takes a while for people to feel brave enough to read something personal to a group of people. But that's exactly what we do. And one of the inspirations has been Alcoholics Anonymous, excuse me, where people share their stories and nobody critiques their stories. They all just support and encourage them. So, you know, having attended one of those meetings, I thought, well, why only for alcoholics? Why not everybody? And anybody, everybody who needs someone to listen to their story. So sometimes it takes a while before someone is ready to read what they've written. And this episode I'm going to read to you is about a little girl who, when she first came to Stillwater, she was 6 years old. And for months before she turned 7, she would write, she would do the writing, but she would refuse to speak. And the episode I'm going to read is a day when she finally does speak. She reads her writing to the group. And this takes place in 2016, just after the presidential election that year. So the community and many other people were in shock. They couldn't believe what was happening and what was about to happen. So there was a lot of fear, and the word kept circulating around the community in Bushwick. The big warning was, don't open the door, right? That was what everyone was to remember, don't open the door. But they felt safe in this place. And we were just beginning our project, our Quixote project, where we would read and collectively translate the Spanish into English and then adapt it as dialogue and also as song lyrics. And we teamed up with a composer, Kim Sherman, who wrote, with the children, wrote beautiful music to go with their original lyrics. So this became, the reading became a theatrical production, a musical theater production, which we then toured all around New York City and beyond. We would go to people's private homes and perform in their living room. We would go to colleges such as Hunter and Yale and Johns Hopkins and so many wonderful elite schools, and also to government offices. We performed at New York City Hall. So the message was that these children belong here. They belong in the world of higher education, of civic power, and in any neighborhood, and that they belong in this country. So that's the context, that's the setting for this. And we've pushed these tables together in the middle of the room, and we're all sitting around the outside. And I'll begin now. The reading is about 10 minutes. The only child not to read is Sarah. For the first 2 months of the Traveling Adventures project, she has been quiet during class. When asked to read her writing to the group, she has shaken her head no. Sarah has been coming to the Stillwater's writing class on Saturdays since the spring, but she has yet to read aloud her own work, always asking a volunteer or another kid to read for her and to protect her privacy by not revealing her name. The Quixote group is about half the size of the big writing class, which sometimes reached as many as 50 people. And there's nowhere for her to hide anymore, so she simply refuses. Then one day, in private, during a break, Sarah informs me that at her school, in her words, they're kind of rough on people. Everything you say is only right or wrong. She tells me that she sits at her desk in class, never moves, and never says anything. The school sent a social worker to inspect the house and interview her parents. The social worker asked if there is violence at home, but there wasn't any. Sarah is just hiding, holding her mother's leg when faced with a stranger, or hanging on to her desk in class. At school, she doesn't know what is coming next. Play is not allowed in the classroom. A vague threat of punishment for being wrong fills the air like humidity, and in her innocence, she is afraid. How do I help Sarah to be brave? I don't want to force her to read to the group. That could inflict trauma. I remember a story my paternal grandfather, Papa, once told me, a story that guides my teaching and illuminates this problem. At age 10, in 1917, he had won a bamboo fishing pole in a small town raffle, way up in the mountains of northern Idaho. His father told him he would need to wrap the pole in thread, an intricate procedure requiring great patience. His father said that he himself needed to rewrap his own pole too. So they sat side by side on the porch and wound thread around their bamboo poles. My grandfather added at the end of the story that, looking back, he suspected that his father didn't really need to rewrap his own fishing pole. Today, remembering Papa's side-by-side education and my father's tendency, as long as I can remember, to read whatever book I happened to be reading so we could think side by side, I sit next to Sarah as we write, and when it's my turn, I read to the group, showing her the way by making myself vulnerable. There was a time, I say, looking down at my paper, when I thought nobody loved me. I called the city's phone number for depression. A woman answered and said her name was Sarah. Our little Sarah at Stillwater's looks up, and there is that face again, eyes and mouth wide open at the coincidence of names. I keep reading. She asked how she could help me, and I began to cry. My mother had raised me to cry, telling me that whenever I needed to, I could let the tears fall and keep going until whatever was stopping me was washed away. And I couldn't stop crying for a long, long time. I cried so hard I choked and coughed, and boogers came out of my nose. The word boogers makes the kids laugh. But Sarah did not hang up the phone. I kept repeating, nobody loves me. 2 hours of conversation later, after telling that grown-up Sarah that I had not left my apartment for days, eating only boiled eggs and saltine crackers and food left outside my door by friends I would not allow to enter, I agreed to go to the hospital. At the hospital, the psychiatrist, Heather, after listening to me for a long time, I don't tell the kids about the bandage on my wrist, told me she would rather have 2 broken legs than have what I had inside me. She promised me that I would feel better, but I would need to work very hard for a long time with the help of a therapist to understand my story. And she was right. The more I told my story, the better I understood myself and the more peaceful I felt in my heart. I want the kids, especially the reticent Sarah sitting beside me, to know that here in this room, in our sanctuary, it is safe to be vulnerable, which comes from the Latin for able to be wounded. Because here, nobody will wound you. Here you can breathe. No one will drop from the sky and carry you away. After weeks of refusing and listening and watching with those bottomless black eyes as other children and grown-ups read their stories, on this one day, this day of vulnerability, Sarah, daring beyond daring, raises her hand, is called on, and begins to read. She says, "My mommy rode across the desert on the back of a tiger. That's how she came here from Mexico." At first, nobody speaks. Then they can't stop asking questions. These questions are born not from doubt, but a love of adventure. "Really?" says one of the kids. "Yes, really. She told me in Spanish at bedtime." "How long did it take them to get across the desert?" 2 weeks. "How did they cross the border?" "They came to a very high wall. It went as far away as they could see, to the left and to the right. The tiger said, 'I can't jump over the wall. You need to carry on alone now.' My mommy said, 'I know you can do it. You have very strong legs.' My mommy held on to the fur of the tiger's neck. The tiger moved its head up and down and crouched and wiggled its butt. The kids all laugh. Every time they hear the word butt with 2 T's or with a single T, they need to laugh. Then the tiger jumped over the wall. My mommy almost touched the moon. The tiger said, 'I did it.' My mommy said, 'Yes, you did it for sure.' And I, Stephen, I say, 'My cat moves her head up and down before she jumps up onto the refrigerator.' 'Wow,' says Sarah, 'that's high up.' The kids have more questions. The room is jumping. How did they eat? The tiger knew where to find water and rabbits and cactus fruit and how to step away from snakes that were hiding under the sand. How did they get to Brooklyn? They walked all the way to Brooklyn, through the desert and the forest and the fields and the ghost towns and the swamps. Sarah speaks faster and louder as she goes, releasing a horizontal avalanche of words. Nobody tried to stop them? No. When they reached the city, they stayed on dark streets with not a lot of people. The shadows protected them. Nobody saw the tiger? Yes, strangers noticed the tiger and they were afraid, so they called animal control. The tiger fought back, she says, rising up a little bit from her chair, with its mighty paws and long, sharp teeth. But there were too many animal control humans with nets and ropes and a dart that made the tiger sleep. My mommy said, "Bye," and she cried. Her tears made lines on her dusty face. Sarah is now speaking in tongues, possessed and transported by the visions she has inherited from her mother. She continues, "My mommy was sad for the tiger and sad for herself. She missed Mexico out in the fields. She missed the dirt between her toes and the wide open heavens above, more full of stars than darkness. Here in Brooklyn, the buildings blocked most of the sky. The electric lights erased the stars, and her feet, still bare, were punished by the unforgiving concrete. The tiger cried too, quietly, as it was falling asleep, and said goodbye. The animal control took the beast away in a cage inside a truck." There is an awestruck silence in the room. "What language did the tiger speak?" asks Lily, a teenager. "Spanish. My mom didn't know English then." "Time's up for today," I say. "Thank you, Sarah. Good job, everyone. See you next time." As the kids walk out the door, they look stunned, as if they had just met God. And that's the passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. And Stephen, one of the things I didn't mention at the beginning, but I'll talk about it now, I would like you to comment on it, is that what struck me about the book and why I so wanted it to be presented, and Diana to present it, and she invited you along to present your work and your work with the kids, was that not only were the children, translating this classic, but it was through translating that they were able to tell their own stories,
Right.
and inserted their stories into the revised screenplay,
Yeah.
And so can you talk about the stories of the kids, especially the immigrant experiences of the children and how it came out in the retelling of Don Quixote?
Yes. So as we read the book and translated it, we would tell each other stories that related to Quixote. Like, for example, there's a scene early in the novel when Quixote rescues a young boy, a shepherd boy, from being beaten by his master, and of course it turns out he hasn't really rescued him at all, but he thinks he has temporarily. And I mean, sadly so, a lot of people have stories of their own about being treated that way, and about a desire to rescue someone else who's being mistreated. And so we told our stories, and then that became a song. That became the first song that we wrote. Was the refrain of that song asked, "Can we help? Can we help? Can we help?" So they weren't just telling the story of a victim of abuse. The kids had this desire to help someone else, which really sort of reversed my expectation about where this could go. They weren't saying, woe is us. They were saying, we want to help. We want to do something about this. And then later in the book, there's a wonderful passage where a shepherd woman, Marcella, shows up at the funeral of a man who people blame her for his death. He committed suicide, and so they blame her. They say it's because she denied him. He loved her, and she wouldn't have anything to do with him. So she gets up and she gives this speech to everyone at the funeral where she says, "My life is my life. I don't owe anyone anything. I told him I wasn't interested, and he wouldn't give up." So it was basically no means no. And a number of the kids had stories to share about similar experiences where there were certain things expected of them because they are girls. So, that happened all the way through our reading. And we would gather these stories, and then we'd look at the stories and say, oh, wow, look at this. Listen to this sentence that this person wrote. That's really beautiful. I think that could be a song lyric. So then we would take a piece of what someone wrote and start to build lyrics together based on that. And then the challenge became how to tell a story that was specific enough to be involving, and but what do you want to say, like comprehensive or welcoming enough for everyone to feel like it was their song too, right? So that's the challenge when you do everything collectively, is how do you reach that point where you're true to a character, but you're also representing a group? So does that help to answer the question?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so the novel is really a vessel for their stories. And as in the passage I read, so many of these families, all of them, have made significant journeys. They've set off on their adventures. It may not be for the same type of reasons as Don Quixote sets off on adventures, but it's related, I would say, where they are trying to have a life that is better for them and for their children. And so in a sense, just like him, they're real life heroes on behalf of their family, um, going off into the unknown and dangerous world.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I was about to ask somebody had a question, and you know what? Since we have an intimate group, I invite Marlene to ask her question. Yes.
She can.
Yeah, I was wondering did you have a special edition of the Quixote? I mean, it's a very difficult novel. My college students complain.
Yes.
So how did you get them to be engaged enough to want to read this novel? Did you give them a kind of introduction? How did you manage this?
So the first thing I did was I brought in the book, and it's huge, of course. It's like 1,000 pages in the edition I have. So I said, we're going to read this book and translate it. And they were shocked. They said, but it's so big. It's too big. And I said, well, I like to do things that people think are impossible, because once you do that, then you're not so scared anymore of when people tell you something's impossible, right? If you can take on this book, it's kind of like, how Quixote is out hunting giants, right? And windmills, but he thinks they're giants. And there's all types of giants in our lives, right? Some of them are evil, like the president that they were responding to in this scene. And some giants are heroes as well. So taking on this book meant that they could take on anything, really, and that they didn't need to be afraid of obstacles or challenges that seem at first to be too big. So that was part of it, was pitching it as something that other people think is impossible.
Mhm.
I tell them, people would say, you can't do this, and that gives them some motivation. And then I told them that it's a very famous story that is much loved by Hispanic communities, populations all around the world for the last 400 years. And then what the biggest selling point, I think, was I gave them a brief summary of the plot, the basic setup of Quixote and Sancho setting off on adventures trying to save the world. And then I said, the big thing was that it's funny. So I told them this book is really funny, and kids love to laugh. So I mean, everyone does, but kids especially. It's very important to them that stories are at least partly funny. So when I described the tall, skinny old man and his short, round partner, best friend, riding off on an old horse and a donkey and trying to rescue people, even when those people did not want to be rescued or didn't need rescuing, they loved that. It just struck them as really funny. And also, there's another factor is that Quixote and Sancho are basically playing pretend, which is something kids love to do, right? My daughters, they could spend hours pretending with each other, making up their own dialogue and, describing where they are and what the action is. So I said, basically, this is like this. It's a story about an old man and his friend, but that old man has really the heart of a child. He has the generous heart and imagination of a child. So I told them, we're going to make him into a kid. And eventually we decided that the kid was Sarah, the little girl who I read to you about. Little tiny girl was going to take on all the giants and save the world, which the children want to do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
This question, I'm going to ask both Diana and Stephen, this question. Well, it's for the both of you to chime in. In the book, there is a lot of discussion about finding the right word, but in the translation. Can you speak about that? How important it was for the kids to find the right word
Oh, yes. Well, we once spent an entire session, like we spent over an hour debating a passage where they had to choose between the words can't and won't. So the wicked boss who I told you about, who was whipping the boy, the shepherd boy, he after Quixote leaves, he just goes right back to abusing the boy, and he says, now call your hero, right? You'll see that he, and we had to choose between won't or can't save you. And that discussion was fabulous about all the implications of saying, if you're saying he can't save you, that means it's simply beyond his power, or that the social injustice that's being enacted here is beyond anyone's capacity to fix it on their own. It could also, if he said he won't help you, then that implies that he could, but he, for one reason or another, he chooses not to, or something happens, fate intervenes, and he doesn't end up helping. So it was a really important moment to define what the abuser was saying, and then that ended up being a scene in the play. So in the middle of that scene, as this whipping is happening, we pause, and the kids debate with each other, can't versus won't, and then they tell the audience that they still haven't resolved it, that they've talked for hours, and in every show they talk about it. So in every show, they ask the audience to vote. They presented their sides, they presented their arguments for won't and can't, and then asked for a show of hands, who would vote for won't and who would vote for can't. And then whatever the audience chose, then they would rewind and perform the scene with the audience's choice of word. And getting it right seemed to be important for two big reasons. One was because you want to be understood. You want to make sure that nobody's going to misinterpret what you're saying. You want to be precise, right? That's the goal of this. This whole project was for them to be able to travel around and share their stories with people and raise awareness about the lives and the promise of immigrants. And so they want to be understood clearly, precisely. And then also, part of that process is them figuring out what they actually mean, right? What do they want to say? So they want to be understood, but first they have to figure out what it is that they're trying to say. So that's where that comes from, is that desire to be accurate.
Thank you. Diana, do you have anything you want to add as being the translator? You mentioned it earlier when you talked about how difficult it was to translate, but you know, say what you were going to say.
Yeah, it's, one of my favorite moments in the play is when they have the audience vote. And I just have to think, I think Professor Gottlieb, I don't know if you would agree, I think Cervantes would have loved that, because that's just so Cervantine, because, Cervantes never tells us what to think. That's what's so, that's why the book is what it is. He just lays it all out there and he pushes you to think, but he doesn't tell you how to think or, what conclusion to come to. And if you've read the Quixote, you know that the Quixote is presented by Cervantes as being a translation.
That's right.
As being a translation from an Arabic manuscript. So the play, the meta translating play, the whole play on translation is fascinating. And also, these children live in two languages. So they're always going back and forth. And that they live in translation. So it was a challenge for me. I have to say that the thing with what you're talking about, that search for the right word, I will just say that I had to fight tooth and nail with the publisher to leave all those parts in. Because those were the parts they wanted to cut. And, you know, as with anything, you have to choose your battles in life, right? So there were things that I gave up, you know, okay, you want to call that something else, that's fine. To keep that in, because I think, to me, it's at the heart of Stephen's book. But, you know, the back and forth and the debates about the translation, at first they didn't really want to keep them. So I had to fight for them, and I'm very glad. And Stephen agreed that they had to stay in, and I'm glad that they did, because they might have not stayed otherwise. And I think that would have been a shame.
I want to add something too. I just typed it into chat also, that the word translate comes from Latin for carried across. So, you know, I read you a story about somebody crossing the border, crossing the country. And so translation is a fundamental experience of the children and their families, right? In both senses, the sense that Diana was talking about, and also the journeys that they've made. So it's, yeah, it's crucial in both senses.
I wanted to add, I don't know, does someone else have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, are you still doing the Quixote? Have you changed to another?
No, we're
book,
still doing it. We're doing it by Zoom now because my family moved up to Poughkeepsie, and I have continued through the entire pandemic to work with the kids in Bushwick on Zoom. So, which is amazing. I mean, it's been, gosh, over 2.5 years of working together virtually, and they are so devoted. They just, you know, keep showing up on Saturdays. And during the pandemic, we wrote 4 new songs and a lot of new dialogue. And we've come basically to the end of what I think our show is, but I could be surprised and find that it goes on. But it's beautiful. And now the challenge is, how do we actually stage this? Because there's a distance, a physical distance. And also Zoom is really hard to rehearse, especially singing on Zoom, because you can't get the timing right. But, you know, we'll figure out a way. And we've been doing animated short films during COVID. And they're archived on our website under videos. We did 2 that were based on the Aeneid, and 1 based on Proust. And they're lovely. And we teamed up with a group called the Animation Project that has a similar mission to ours, but the medium they use is animation. So we've done all this stuff together without actually having been in the same room for 2.5 years or more. Which, you know, that keeps inspiring me. I'm amazed that it carries on. And up here in Poughkeepsie, I've just started another Still Waters for immigrant families. And this time, most of the students are actually mothers. So there are some kids there, but it's mostly the mothers who are showing up here. And I love that. And just yesterday, we started reading Quixote, me and the moms. And they love it. And in this class, the reason why these moms have been coming is they need to learn English. And part of teaching them English is translation. So reading an entertaining story and something that's ambitious, when they look at it and they shake their heads like that's too big, just like the kids did. But then I say, no, I know you think it's impossible, but it is not impossible. You can do it. So that's like them overcoming obstacles again. And they're really enjoying it. They're writing about themselves. We've replicated the same practice that we had in Bushwick. So I'm very happy that it lives on in both of those ways. And then eventually we'll have mothers and children together performing whatever these folks come up with. So
Yeah, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and does anybody have a question? We have time for one more quick question. No. Well, I have one more quick comment question. Just to piggyback off the whole thought of translation. Also, what I found, I'm not gonna say interesting, but what you know, the kids, that when they spoke to the audience, or when they developed their songs and the dialogue, that it was important for them to add some Spanish so that
yes,
they could communicate. So
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about that, their need to not only to perform in English, but also to maintain the connection to their families through the
yes,
Spanish language?
very important, because they knew that their families were going to see the show. So they were concerned all the way through to make sure that whatever the dialogue and the song lyrics were saying, that there was a balance of English and Spanish, so that in either language, you could follow the story. You might not get all the same words, right? Not all the English would make it into the Spanish and vice versa, but you would have enough of each so that anyone could follow the story. And it was really touching, actually, those many times when kids would be saying, my mom would never understand that, or, you know, how do we help my parents to understand what we're saying? So yeah, that was really important. I'm glad you brought that up. Can I add something just before we have to go?
Sure. Mhm.
Since I know that diversity is a theme of these events that you organize, and that thankfully institutions and individuals are much more aware of what diversity means, and much more willing than in the past to welcome everyone. Although there's still, you know, it's far from over. But I'm aware that I'm a white person, an English speaker, a man, and that at first glance, I wouldn't be on a poster advertising diversity, but what it, and people have said things like, well, you know, I'm telling the stories of the people I work with, and sometimes they feel that I somehow should have let them tell the stories, but my reasoning is that I am amplifying what they tell me. I'm getting their stories out there, and that my job is to be a reporter, that I say what I see and I hear, and I relay that. And what I seek always is common ground. So I think when we talk about diversity, we're often talking about where can we meet that feels like common ground. So that's what I'm hoping for. Because I'm very sensitive to the fact that there are many people and writers of color who have not been well represented compared to white Anglophone writers. So I tell everyone who asks that I'm looking for common ground.
Well, thank you for saying that, Stephen, because as chair of the diversity committee of the Alumni Association, that's something that we've actually are embracing, you know, that we are celebrating what's the uniqueness of various groups, but always looking at what's the same and what's common about us, what we share, you know, so and what we can learn from each other. So thank you for you know, offering that as a closure. There is a question in the chat about if one wants to volunteer. So I think
yes.
would it be great if you could put some contact information?
Yeah.
You know, if someone wants to volunteer or to learn more about the Stillwaters project,
Yeah.
where they go.
Right now, I'm going to put my email address in chat. there it is. Anyone can feel free to write to me and learn more. There's also the website. I'll type that in. There's the website that has information about the work in Brooklyn. Soon it will have information about the work in Poughkeepsie. And I noticed that Elizabeth said that Vassar has an active theater department. Yes. And in fact, we've only had 3 classes so far here. And we have already 3 volunteers from Vassar. So
Wow.
that's
Okay.
really promising. Yeah. And then I've been in touch with the theater department as well, because in classes here, we act out dialogues. I told the students, I said that we're rehearsing for real life. So acting out scenarios in their everyday life and performing in front of the group. And so I've invited theater students at Vassar to come coach them, come be a director or a fellow actor and help these people to get up on their feet and say things with emotion. So yes, that's beginning to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I want to thank Diana Conchado and Stephen Hoff again for, spending this hour with us and sharing with us their work at, Still Waters and with the book I'm sorry.
You got it.
Kid I'm sorry.
Okay.
Kid Quixote. That's it.
Yes.
That's it. Yes. Okay. So, and sharing the work with that, I want to thank you, alums of Hunter who spent the hour with us to hear, their stories about their work. And I would like, as always, to thank Kinshasa for helping us put this together technically and communicating with our presenters. So please, look out. We're going to be doing not only the Diversity Committee of the Alumni Association, but the AA in itself has various programs that we'll be doing throughout the year. So please look through your emails, and join us again for another event. So, and that night, good night, everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
and an honor.
Bye.
Bye-bye.